Bruno, please just hang on a little longer. We have somebody in mind. We have to make sure, blah, blah, blah. Next thing I know, I break my neck. And then 1 year went to 2, 2 went to 3, and 3 went to 4. And finally I said to him, well, either you find that somebody or I retire with it. And then, of course, they came up with Backlund was the guy, because even though Graham came in first, that took the belt from me, but Backlund was the guy that they finally had in mind with. And then they went with that, and with me, it was great again, because after that, I went back to in between titles the way I was doing. I started, I was just wrestling here and there at my own pace, and I did that till I retired in 1982, I think. Yeah, at the end of 81, I think it was October of 81.
Mm-hmm. What is your memory of working with superstar Billy Graham?
Well, it was exciting because people took to the match and whatever. I enjoyed it, but with Billy it was different. You weren't going to go in there and have the kind of match you would have with the Hans Mortier or with Ivan Koloff, but it was strongman match and stuff like that, and the people bought into it real well. So great reaction from the people. So I enjoyed it, but I can't tell you that they were the most memorable matches as far as the kind of matches that I had with Billy. But they were good. They I enjoyed them. The people were they were in those matches, and that was the main purpose. And it was fine.
Dan, would you like to take the next one?
Many people remember the cage match that you had with Billy Graham, where they teased you winning the belt very heavily. Was there ever a plan for you to be the WWF champion again?
Me?
Yeah.
Plans for me to win again? Absolutely not. There was no plans for me to ever take that belt again, because you're talking about at that time with Billy Graham. I imagine that was in 79, I guess. No, I was coming toward the end of my retirement. In fact, I had some commitments, and I had promised McMahon that I would hang around long enough for the Meadowland. I don't know if they still call it that now, in New Jersey, that was being constructed. And Vince wanted me to open that before I retired. And I told them that okay, because initially that thing was supposed to have been ready, I think in the middle of 1980, but they had delays after delays, and now it's 1981. And it's by the time it was ready. And then I did open the Meadowland, and then Japan heard that I was going to retire. So the Shohei Baba's organization contacted me if I would do a farewell tour of Japan. So on October the 4th, I wrestled in Shea Stadium. I left on the 5th for Japan. I got there on the 6th, which was my birthday, and I did a 10-day tour, and then I come home and I was retired.
We recently interviewed Larry Zbyszko, and he spoke very highly of you, and he mentioned everything that you did to help bring him in. What is your memories of working with Larry?
Well, Larry was, in my opinion, a better talent than he's often been credited with. Why do I say that? Because if you watched him in the earlier years as a scientific wrestler, he did great. He could do all the moves. He was great in what we call the high spots and great in wrestling moves. He could do it all, and I thought he was. I thought Larry was just great. And then when Larry became a villain, he became a completely different person altogether. I mean, he was the villain, and he did it in such fashion that not too many guys. I've seen guys that were good guys, scientific, and then they became villain. But basically, their style, everything was the same. The only thing that changed was when they were good guys, they would wrestle a villain. Now that they're supposed to be good guys, they're wrestling. When they were villains, I should say, they wrestled the good guy. Now that they were bad guys, they wrestled the good guys. But basically, Flair's a perfect example. No knock to Flair, because Flair was a hard working, exciting worker. But basically, if you watched him as the good guy or the bad guy, he was the same. He did the exact same thing. Not Zbyszko. Zbyszko, when he was good, you saw him do all the clean, scientific, beautiful moves. But when he was a villain, that was gone, and he did very villainous things, which still provide you with a lot of action. But you sure saw a big difference as far as his style. So he had that great ability to do that, and not too many guys could do that. So I mean, there were plenty of others, but I mean, but he was one of those. So there was no question about how good I think he was much greater than most people who write about wrestling ever have given him credit for.
How does your match with Larry at the Shea Stadium rank in your career highlights?
Well, I don't know that I would say it was as good as the one I had, the first cage match I ever had with Koloff in Madison Square Garden. It certainly was great, but you have to understand that when I wrestled Koloff in the Garden, we were young, and I was I didn't have the injuries that accumulated through the years. So we went at that thing like two horses. I mean, it was I'll never forget that. The people, I don't think, ever sat down for about 15, 16 minutes, and afterwards, my God, everybody was talking about it. I mean, that was really a cage match. With Zbyszko, I'm not going to tell you it wasn't good or that I wasn't satisfied with it, but I'd have to put it in a different perspective. I was satisfied with it, and I thought it was good for that particular time of my life, in that particular time in my career. You know what I'm saying? You know, but I would not put it in the same class as that one I had with Koloff in Madison Square Garden.
Did you work any other territories in the early 80s, or were you just completely out?
No. Well, no. Before I retired, I was wrestling in New York the least. I was doing a lot with the Bruiser in around Chicago and Indianapolis and places. I was going to St. Louis. I went to California for what's his name in Los Angeles. I'd done with Shire in Frisco earlier years. But I also went to for Paul Bosch down in Houston a number of times. Where else? You know, and I went back to Australia for one more tour. That was my fourth, and Japan. That's about it as far as before my retirement. McMahon, I was just go with him. I tried to stay away from New York, but I came back just to for when he would call me, like if he thought that Boston needed a lift, he would say to me, Bruno, could you come back for just for 2 shows or so in Boston? Boston's kind of lagging back. And he thought that might make a difference, so I would do that. And I did that for him in Philadelphia. I did it for him in Washington. But the more of the other times, I would be in other territories.
James, would you like to take the next one?
Sure.
Sorry, thanks, James. Would you like to take the next question?
Sure. When you returned in the early 80s, I guess it was closer to the mid-80s when you were the announcer, the Hogan and McMahon changing the business into the more mainstream that you've seen today had already begun. What was your opinion of the change?
Well, first of all, when I came back in September of 1984 when I was contacted by McMahon, and I was totally misled. I was told that, you know, that he wanted to keep in his dad's tradition, and who better than me to be involved since I'd been around for so long, and it would be great. He says he and I had done commentating from 1978, I think it was, to 1981, I believe, that he and I did the commentating together while I was still wrestling. I would do that. And so he wanted me to be back with that, and supposedly as an advisor and what have you. But when I did come back, I became very disillusioned because I started seeing changes that, you know, some people might have thought were great and exciting. To me, I guess I was of the old mentality. I did not like it, and then it was very obvious about steroids and drugs were, you know, very prominent, and all this I found very, very bothersome, and I started to let him know that I didn't want any part of this. I wanted out, but unfortunately I made a stupid mistake. I had signed a contract, and in fact, when I was given the contract, I said, what do we need this for? He says, well, you know, he said, we want to do things differently from the way it was in the old days, and blah, blah, blah. And I went along, and I was not seeing a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer. I didn't study all the fine prints and all that. And when I wanted out the first time, I didn't say anything to McMahon yet. I went to my lawyer to see if I could get out, and he said, no, you've got your hooked in pretty good. So I knew I had to stay for the duration, but I was very, very unhappy. They all knew about it. I made no bones about it. As soon as that thing was up, I quit, and I left. No, like I say, to each his own. I'm sure there are people, I don't know about you fellas, maybe you think it's good. I found it disgusting. I found it vulgar. I found the nudity, the vulgarity, the profanity. To me, it became disgusting. It became an embarrassment. I hated it then, and I hate it now, and that's why I refuse to watch it. I haven't watched it in about 12, 13 years. I know if I was a younger guy and I had young kids, I know that they would never be allowed to watch it. No, there's nothing good I will say about it, and that's me. You know, again, I can only speak for me. For me, I think that, and I'll tell you something else. I hear people say, yeah, but it's more popular. That's nonsense. I remember the arenas here in Pittsburgh. I used to wrestle in Madison Square Garden, Pittsburgh here, Washington, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston. All these major, we had the most major arenas in the country throughout the Northeast. And we used to wrestle in those arenas between 12 and 15 times a year. They come to Pittsburgh now maybe twice a year, and they can't come anywhere near a sellout.